Welcome to the Fast and the Furious, the podcast covering science or lack thereof in the Fast and Furious franchise. I'm one of your co-hosts, Melissa Miller. I'm a science writer.
And I'm Dr. Lisa Will, a professor of physics and astronomy. In this episode, The Fast and the Furious is going to cover the fourth movie, 2009's Fast and Furious. We'll also chat with a medical doctor about whether or not any of these characters should still be alive.
Lisa and I, first up, want to acknowledge the creative work of the writers and actors who are still on strike right now, without whom we wouldn't have these amazing movies. Hopefully they get a fair deal soon. All right, well, let's get into Fast ampersand Furious.
Oh, you weren't gonna show up?
You saved my life. I'm willing to return the favor. This will help get you to Praga. Don't. Going in there is suicide.
I have no choice.
You must have loved her very much. Vaya con Dios.
This is where my jurisdiction ends.
This is where mine begins.
This one picks up pretty soon after the first one with Dom and Letty and the other parts of the team, because Too Fast, Too Furious just involved Brian and some new friends, and Tokyo Drift has Dom come in only at the very end, but actually that takes place 2 or 3 movies from now, so don't think too much about that. That was a little jarring to me, actually, when I saw it again recently.
Absolutely.
Wait, where are we? What happened? Why are we on the run?
Absolutely. Yeah. So basically, this movie starts off with the audience being confused.
Right.
Happy to see some of our favorite characters back, wondering how we got to the Dominican Republic with them. But it's a very dynamic beginning to the movie.
Yeah, and it goes very like James Bond in terms of like big stunt before you even put up, the opening credits.
Yeah, and we really feel like this is where the stunts start to ratchet up from the previous 3 movies. We start to see stuff happening that isn't just straightforward car chases and tricks you can do with a car. We get into a lot more things like, no, you really shouldn't do this with your car. That's where this that starts in this movie.
Yeah, well, and my first question to you in that opening stunt with the gas tanker flipping and all that kind of stuff is that math that someone could do in their head? Like, is Dom just a savant? Because you can see him sitting there thinking about when he needs to go so that he goes right underneath it.
Yeah, I think my note when I was watching the movie, like Dom drives under like a tumbling tanker. I think that's how I did it. So yeah, we see him thinking about it, but there's so many things that are outside of the control to calculate. Like, would that tanker hit a rock and bounce differently? Somebody flying through the air, are they going to hit a wind resistance that you aren't anticipating? There's a lot of trust in the physics and in the math there. But yeah, I think it's interesting because they do show Dom many times assessing his environment, looking what's going on around him, and it looks like he's making a very secure calculation. And he's not. I think he's going with his gut instinct more than anything else. Muscle memory from the last time he drove under a tumbling gas tanker. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I definitely picture in that sequence, especially the like meme of the woman like doing math, you know what I mean? Where there's like all the math equations like going
Yeah.
by next to her. I feel like if they put that in there, it would fit right in with just like the way that he's, clearly really thinking about it and eyeballing it. Yeah, I like that, factoring in wind resistance. He just drove that stretch of roads like, oh, there was that one pothole, I at least like thinking that he's actually a complete savant. And it comes up, obviously, this is the first of many, many, many of these type of stunts where it's just like, okay, there's no way, right? But
Yeah.
technically, all of these things can be calculated.
Well, and that comes up in another part of the opening sequence as well. Letty jumps into the car where Dom is. And this is a case where you look at the physics and you're like, okay, in terms of the physics, it actually kind of makes sense. He catches up with the tanker, he's pacing the tanker. And so they're both going at the same rate. So the relative velocity is 0. So she should just have to jump straight across because she would have the same forward velocity. So she would end up in the car. But in reality, that involves, yeah, being able to steer that they're both going in straight line motion, the wind resistance not being a major factor. Like, did Letty like actually jump ahead of the car so the wind resistance pushes her back? Keeping the vehicles absolutely at the same speed. So it's like, yeah, that's one of those things where, yeah, we can do it. Could you really? Although just trying to assess it in terms of the physics, it's like that's probably one of the more realistic things that they've done. Disclaimer, I don't recommend any of you trying it at home. But yeah, in terms of the physics, it works out. It's actually the environmental factors that would make that one difficult.
Right. Okay.
And then there's another part in this movie where I think we see a little bit of Dom's calculations in his head. And that's when he's assessing the accident scene and recreating what happened when Letty dies.
Yeah, some
Spoiler
real
alert.
CSI, some real CSI stuff in that particular scene for sure.
Yeah, I looked and I tried, it's like, how many skid marks can we see? But there's like a few skid marks and some yellow powder on the ground, and suddenly he can visualize everything. And I
Yeah.
know in terms of storytelling, that was a device for the audience to see what happened. And I know forensic scientists can get a lot out of skid marks. I just don't think they gave that much detail.
Yeah, so that all comes about because Dom decides everyone's safer if he's not, with them or whatever, which, that's obviously its own trope or whatever. But obviously, in at least the short term, Letty is not better off. It sounds like she goes back to LA, starts to work with Brian to secure her clean record and Dom's clean record, which, as you know from our chat with the legal expert, hopefully she at least got all that stuff in writing. But yeah, I mean, and I'm curious about how this came about, right? Did Michelle Rodriguez say, sure, I'll come back for 4, but like, I've only got 2 weeks or something like that, write me out pretty quickly? Or how it came about, or if she always knew, like, oh no, but they'll bring me back or something like that. And that's a fun story arc. I've always wanted to be on a soap opera and have amnesia or whatever. So I don't know the story behind that, but it's an interesting setup. And Brian is now apparently in the FBI, which again, we got to keep track of like when he is and isn't working for different government agencies. I like those scenes with him working with his team, wearing a suit, breaking that guy's nose for the first of, I think, 2 or 3 times over the course of this series. But yeah, it's all a little bit convoluted in terms of they're trying to take someone down who smuggles heroin across the border. This is how we introduced Giselle, which I'd honestly completely forgotten about.
Me too. Me too. That
Yeah,
was, and yeah, I think that's one of those things where in this, it's like, oh, this character was in here this early. And it reminds me, yeah, this series has been going on for over 20 years and you lose track of some things. And some people seem like they've been in there forever. And
right.
others, it's like, wow, I'm surprised how early they were introduced. I wrote in my notes while watching the movie the last time, Han is alive, but not undead in this movie. And so one of those complications with the
Right,
timeline. I was just gonna say it
right.
always surprises me how early in the movie Letty is killed off.
Yes, right.
With killed in quotation marks.
Right, exactly. Like that's really why I was thinking like, okay, Michelle Rodriguez agreed to come back, but didn't want to film too many scenes. Kind of the same with Sung Kang in terms of Han is just in that opening sequence and then quote unquote might go off to Tokyo or whatever. It's the first time they tease us with that, those monsters. Thankfully, he doesn't actually do that for a while. The whole setup is really interesting in terms of, yeah, Letty working for Brian back on the quote unquote right side of the law here. And then also just this convoluted setup that Braga has, that he's his own, right? He introduces himself as the number 2 or whatever, Braga, but it's really him, that Giselle is there as his sort of liaison, that in order to join the team, first you have to win a street race. And
Yeah.
then they kill the drivers, as far as I can tell, every single time and then start over again. Like, that doesn't seem efficient.
It doesn't seem efficient and it's a little brutal. And I think it's after this movie that they really start to, in the franchise, minimize what they say our heroes, our family does in terms of like, oh yeah, but there were no casualties, that sort of thing. That's not true for this movie.
Right. It's true. Yeah, no, exactly. They shoot many, many people, but it's always because they're under threat, right? So
Right.
fair enough. Yeah, you always have to give your Disney princess or your hero in general that sort of out of like, oh no, they just fell off a cliff in front of me, kind of thing.
And then
Yeah.
this is one of the movies where we see Dom take a bullet and apparently not care. So
Yeah,
going
no.
back to our conversation of the superpowered mutant gene or something like that.
Yep, mark that one up for the MCU, and we'll definitely get into that with our doctor. But yes, the first time, I think that is just like he just kind of brushes it off, right?
I think Mia,
Mia sews him up, but they don't even show her taking out the bullet.
no, I don't think so. And I don't think they show it being a through and through. So I guess maybe he's powerful because he's just got this underlying layer of bullets that deflect. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll definitely dive into that one with Jackson. What I do like about this movie is that Dom and Brian are sort of like snippy with each other, right? If this takes place for Dom, at least right after movie one, then sure, Brian let him go, but he still knows that Brian was a cop who, was infiltrating his group, is the reason that his family up until that point is sort of spread out and all of that. And so I just sort of like it that they're still rivals, right? It begins the whole thing with like, you cheated, right? Like who would win in a street race, between the two of them kind of stuff. But that really by the end of this, Dom making all of the sacrifices he has to, and Brian testifying for him and stuff like that. It sounds like after this one, they really are family.
Yeah. And I like that had to build. It almost seemed a little too fast in the first movie that they were getting along so quickly, just like, oh, well, I'm going to let you go and that's all good. So yeah, this one seems to cement the family at the end.
Yeah, and I mean, fair enough for Dom. It's like, I let you in the last time and you turned out to be an undercover cop, and slept with my sister. So I can see him being like a little bit like, why are you here again?
Absolutely.
And I mean, the general incompetence of like the interagency cooperation is very funny to me in this movie. That they go to arrest this older guy in a suit, just being like, well, that must be Braga. It's a good reveal. I like that one. I like that sort of thing.
It is interesting from a storytelling, sort of like the audience experience. But yeah, if you think about it from a competence level of the people involved, not very impressive.
And then I do also like that. I just got distracted by the fact that I wrote he and Mia bone in the kitchen. I must not have been feeling very eloquent when I was watching this movie. But Brian and Mia getting back together I actually think is very sweet. I like that. It's jarring to me in the second movie when he's pursuing anybody else. I'm like, no, but you're meant to be with Mia.
Yeah, he seemed to have gotten over her awfully quick. So it's nice to see that come back here. And then did Mia refer to Dom as her only brother in this movie?
Yes, she did. It's a totally unnecessary line. Like, she didn't need to say it. She could have just, they could have just looked at each other meaningfully or whatever. And I was just like, oh, all right, well, that's a retcon.
Right. Well, I guess she meant only as in the only one I talk to, the only one that's around, the only one that I know of right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, whoever decided to introduce John Cena, God love him or whatever. But yeah, it just was like, people forget about that line. But if you see 4, you're like, but.
No. Remember, we rewatch these movies. We pick up things.
Exactly. Going back through and watching this again, knowing that Braga is, the guy who's pretending to be his second in command, just means that guy is speaking in the third person for the entire movie, which is, a pet peeve, but also pretty funny.
All right. I never thought of that, but that is actually really funny.
So yeah, I mean, we talked about it with our legal expert a little bit too, of getting sent to prison, and we'll see it. They set it up right at the end of 4, that he's going to get broken out. He's not even ever going to make it to prison. But yeah, these are the deals that get made. The FBI said that they would clear Dom's record if Letty worked for them. They clearly don't do that, and he gets sent to prison. So clearly all those I's were not dotted and T's were not crossed.
Well, I can't remember. Was he going to a federal prison or a state prison? Because there's jurisdictions there. So the FBI can say, we will clean your record of all of your federal crimes.
Right.
And then, yeah. So, and I can't remember, they were driving to Lompoc, where they were going,
right.
that prison.
No, that's right. I'm sure that's exactly what it was. Didn't think about getting a clear record from everybody. So.
But now we know, because we talked to the legal expert, if we need any deals, we know the I's to dot and the T's to cross now.
Right, exactly. Make sure you get it in writing and make sure you get it from all possible jurisdictions. Or, just don't do crime.
Yeah, don't do crime. The only other thing I can think of is I've got this weird numbers thing in my head. So when they put up the coordinates of where they're going, I actually look and I double check, like, are those coordinates right for where they end up? And towards the end of the movie, they do list some coordinates and and those coordinates would put them in Baja, California. So I am comfortable
Okay.
with the lat lawn that showed up because, yeah, I do that. It's embarrassing.
Nope, I do it too. I absolutely do it too because it's not that hard, right? Like,
Right.
and there's definitely something I watched recently. I don't remember now if it was one of the Fast and Furious movies where we know they're in the Southern Hemisphere, right? Like most of South America is in the Southern Hemisphere and it says something north. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, no, it's
Yeah,
not. How hard is
I
that?
know. Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe that's why that's always one of those things that pops in my head. And that's like, I knew the latitude would put it just not that far south of San Diego. And I was just like, okay, are they still in Southern California or did they make it into Baja? And it got them
Nice.
down into Baja.
Nice. Good for them. I'm glad that they have that set up. So
Yeah.
the
That
only
makes
thing
us trust the rest of it.
exactly. Honestly, I know it's very little and people are probably being like, what? You even look at that? But I absolutely do. And so I'm glad you brought that up. Somehow I didn't notice it in this one, but it makes me happy that they got it right.
These things pop into my head because I'm an astrophysicist by training. I do planetarium shows, and I know that you can get the altitude of the North Star in the Northern Hemisphere, and it corresponds to your latitude. So for me, if the latitude is wrong, it really pops out because,
Right.
nerd.
No, exactly. Wear that badge proudly.
I do.
Well, I have to say, I'm kind of surprised by the low Rotten Tomatoes scores for this movie because I do feel like this movie ratchets up the action to like where we live in Fast and Furious movies. But it has a 29% with critics and a 67% with audiences, which is lower even than Tokyo Drift.
And the critics' consensus said while Fast and Furious features the requisite action and stunts, the filmmakers have failed to provide a competent story or compelling characters. Yeah, that's an ouch. And now part of me is just trying to remember what would this movie feel like if we didn't know where it was going forward. We would leave thinking Letty's dead. They killed off the lead female character. Brian, once again, not being a particularly competent at his job. I think looking back now, we see where it's beginning to set up the entire rest of the arc. But on its own, yeah, maybe this was fair.
Yeah, now you say it, and like introducing Giselle, like she's not as compelling in this movie as she gets to be in movie 5 and 6. Maybe the critics just don't like bad guys who speak about themselves in the third person, But it's true, at least they call out that the stunts are the requisite, amount of crazy, because those tunnel sequences and stuff like that are pretty cool.
Yeah, they really are.
All right, well, that's our wrap up, but let's get into our interview.
What I did to you was wrong. I'm sorry. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do.
I'm sorry too, Brian. I'm so sorry that you had to come into my home and pretend to love me. I'm so sorry that you ripped my family apart. I'm very sorry that that was hard for you.
I lied to you. I lied to Dom. I lied to everybody. That's what I do best. That's why the feds recruited me.
Maybe you're lying to yourself. Maybe you're not the good guy pretending to be a bad guy. Maybe you're the bad guy pretending to be the good guy. You ever think about that?
Every day.
I always wondered. Why'd you let my brother go that day?
I don't know.
The Fast and the Furious movies definitely put all of our characters through a lot. We're going to talk about some of the injuries that they don't get and other medical questions. Just a heads up that our guests will get into some specifics that some people might be a little bit squeamish about. And also, we're going to cover all of the movies. So spoilers abound through more than just movie 4. All right, let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Jackson Vane. Jackson is a pediatrics emergency doctor and also the host of Hi Everybody, a Bad Medicine podcast, which I highly recommend listening to and finding them at your local convention.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
Good to be here. I was very excited to actually kind of dive into the shenanigans that is the Fast and the Furious. So, my God, the whole series it started from such humble roots and now has become, what the heck is this? Just say it.
They went to space, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. Like, this whole movie series has started even before the Fast and the Furious too, which was crazy when I was doing some research on it too, because I think you did ask me a question beforehand to prepare, right? Like, who's my favorite character? I've told you it's Han, because he's like Han Solo basically, but in the Fast and the Furious. But I learned that his origins was actually in a movie I watched when I was in college called Better Luck Tomorrow.
What?
Yes. So Justin Lin, he wanted more Asian characters, and he just brought in another character from a movie that he made like in the 2000s called Better Luck Tomorrow, which was like a primarily Asian cast. And it actually was like one of the first roles for like John Cho and all them too. So he actually crossed over from one movie franchise into the Fast and the Furious, which is the craziest thing. Because I remembered watching Better Luck Tomorrow when I was growing up, and I'm like, oh my God, it's all connected. Because they all have the same name, and I didn't realize, same actor, apparently same character.
It is a connected universe. Yep.
It is.
Yeah, I was gonna say Lisa clearly is nodding and already knew this, but this is brand new information to me.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to go watch the, whatever it is, then Fast and Furious primer or something like that.
It'll work. He still has the same character, like still kind of cool, kind of aloof, still bad boy, crime guy, and then kind of reforms and then becomes part of the whole family.
Does it explain why he goes and hangs out with a bunch of teenagers halfway through the series?
That I can never explain. That's just awkward and weird in general. But maybe he's still reprising his role from Better Luck Tomorrow and thinks everyone is still the same age.
Somewhere, I forget exactly what movie it is, they show Han's name as actually Han Solo. Like, his last name is spelled like the South Korean city, right? Yeah. Seoul and then O. Yeah. And then at some point, that's not true anymore. And I really wish they had left it at Han Solo.
I know. That would have been really good, but I feel like Disney would have a problem with that. So Disney owns Fox now, so that should be okay, right?
Well, and he's in Star Wars now, right? He was in Obi-Wan Kenobi.
So there's too much crossover. There's this whole universe. The family is spreading too much right now, and it's everywhere.
All right. Well, so we've covered your favorite character. Can you quickly just tell us about your expertise when it comes to medicine, what field you're in and how you sort of got into it?
Yeah. So I'm a pediatric emergency medicine doctor. So I'm an ER doctor that primarily works with children. A lot of my training involves, managing very acutely ill patients. And it could be anything from like a simple fever to a serious trauma where they got into a bad car accident and got seriously injured. Part of my training, I also had to see a lot of adult trauma as well. So all of this together was just something I was really interested in. I knew I was never going to be a regular clinic doctor, and I kind of wanted something a little more chaotic. And hence, that is how I ended up in emergency medicine. The perks of pediatric emergency medicine is my patients aren't as mean and they don't smell as bad.
Okay.
What do you love about the Fast and Furious saga?
It's the most escapism type of movie out there. There's no better way to describe it when essentially the hands of the movie are just cars, because if you want to do something, it's done with cars. I'm sure at some point they're going to do CPR with cars, and I can't wait for that to happen. It's going to happen. I think so. It's just the most ridiculous thing, because if you can do it with your hands, you can do it with a car. And that's what I've learned in the Fast and the Furious.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the fact that they haven't connected anyone to like a car battery yet to like, not CPR, but whatever the like AED. To shock them back is actually kind of surprising.
I've actually seen that in real life, where someone had a child that was like, unfortunately, like pretty ill and not doing well. And the family, instead of calling 911, hooked their kid up to some jumper cables and tried to shock the heart back to life, which does not work. So that's one thing we talk about a lot on our podcast, is how everyone thinks that if your heart has stopped, you can jumpstart it again, which is not the right answer. There's only a very specific number of rhythms that you can do it. Unfortunately, asystole, which means the complete cessation of electrical activity or any kind of functional beating, is not one of those shockable rhythms. So we see that a lot, where you're about to call a code and they're like, just shock them because we saw it on TV. And we go, yeah, no, it's not going to work that way. And I think that's one of the big parts of why our podcast is like fun, but also informative, is because it's almost like medical education, right? Like a lot of people learn medicine from TV. And unfortunately, they're learning a lot of things wrong. So part of it is just trying to make sure people learn the right way.
Yeah. And I'd love to give like the Fast and Furious writers credit to be like, oh, well, we know if we put that thing where you shock someone with jumper cables in, someone's going to try that and really hurt themselves.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't want to give them that credit, because they also never have their characters put on seatbelts and, walk out of flipped cars and all sorts of things.
Yes. There's so many of those instances, and I go, those people won't be stuck in their car after those car accidents. They will fly out. And yeah,
okay. So
I'm
step
not the
one, you don't have to stumble out of a car.
Yeah, I'm not the physicist here, but if you're getting struck at high speeds and you're not restrained to your car, you will at least flip around in the car, if not go out of your car. But most of them drive with their windows down. So if they got T-boned, they get launched out.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've noticed. They always drive with the windows down, and yet they always remain inside the car.
Also, their microphones are amazing. There's no wind noise at all. Amazing. It's practical stuff that you don't think about, right? Like, oh my God, I can hear the person talking next to me and have a perfect conversation and not just hear.
No, that's one of like the go-to things in my household is whenever someone is having a conversation where they wouldn't be able to hear each other, we just go, huh? What? Like to each other across the couch. I think they did it finally in the movie Kick-Ass, I think it was, where there's like two superheroes floating in the air like a block away, and one is, talking smack to the other one, and the other guy's like, I can't hear you, buddy.
Yeah.
And it's like, finally, realistic. Yeah, they're like revving their engines at the start line and also talking to each other. I'm like, no, you're not.
No, you cannot hear anybody at all. Yeah. It's impossible.
Yeah, that's just, since you mentioned it, the like walkie-talkie radio thing drives me crazy because some of them clearly like to hold the thing in front of their face, and press a button, but some of them have like the wired ear connections. Yep. And I'm like, I don't think those two things are compatible. No. Like, I don't think you can be on the same network.
No. And then it'll just like, you'll get the feedback noise. And then that headpiece is going to be useless because then you can't hear anything anymore.
But we can all love these movies still. So correct. Are you able to like watch the movie straight without being like, well, actually, or is there a little bit of both?
There's always like a little bit of like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. But most of the time, if I can suspend disbelief just for a little bit and just enjoy the movie for what it is, then I'm okay. It's not as bad with Fast and Furious. It's worse with like medical stuff, like medical TV shows and whatnot, or horror movies that they try to make really gory. Those are the times when I get really kind of irked out. I think for Fast and the Furious, it's usually if someone gets injured, they just have a little drop of blood down their forehead. And that's usually a sign that they got really, really hurt, even though probably would be a little more mushy.
Yeah.
That is the technical term right there. A mushy body after a car accident.
But yeah, exactly. They don't show those sorts of things on screen. I think there's even one where Dom gets shot. Like rewatching them recently, I was like, someone just shot Dom. And like, we never talk about that again.
No, he gets shot. No one recovers from a like gunshot to the torso easily, ever. Or even to the extremities for that matter. Like, it's a punch that goes through your body, I guess is a good way to describe a bullet. And that damage doesn't just isolate to where that bullet entered. It's all the energy that's being exerted outward from that bullet. So it's basically tearing all the muscle and organs and whatever is in the way on the way out too. You're not going to recover really quickly, I guess is the best way to say it. And Dom, I mean, he is superhuman and he can never die, is what I've learned. He can just walk through everything and he'll be okay. But definitely those, because how many times did he get shot? Just once, right?
I think just once in movie 4, if I counted correctly.
You're going to be hobbling for a little bit. He'd hobble straight into the movie 5. You're not going to want to drive a car afterward either. You're going to want someone to drive you.
Well, and they even allude to that in the later movies. At one point, Roman brings up like, basically, are we indestructible? I like the fact that they are a little bit self-aware at that point that, we actually shouldn't be surviving all of this.
No. Well, even if they don't survive, they do survive though, right? Like Han died, Letty died, but they still came back to life. So no one is truly dead in the Fast universe.
The self-aware Roman stuff in movie 9 I found very endearing because sometimes I can't stand him, but I loved that like audience sort of voice, of being like, think about it. We should all be dead.
Yes. He went to space.
Right. And then he went to space. Right.
Yeah. You should also be dead in space. That car is not proofed to go up into space. At least I'm going to look at Lisa and I'm thinking, no, it's not.
No, duct tape is amazing, but it does have its limits.
Yes. I don't think it would provide enough of a vacuum seal for that.
Well, and also, usually astronauts have to undergo a lot of training to be able to handle going up into space, and they did not. I mean, they weren't up there for very long, so no bone loss or anything like that. But how do you think they would handle the going up and coming back down and recovering as quickly as they had to in the movie?
I mean, it's massive G-forces to go up, right? We always see those videos online where people have G-lock, which is the gravity loss of consciousness. I'm surprised they don't have that. It's a massive exertion of force on their body. So that in itself is already bad. No one threw up. And I feel like you would throw up, right? Because you have no gravity to keep the food in your stomach. So everything's all floaty, loosey goosey. And if they already have weak dispositions, it probably would be throwing up quite a bit as well. And everyone was so well adapted to moving around in space. I feel like that would be really hard to do too. Like I know there's like simulations for them kind of swimming through water and whatnot, but I don't think that's the same. But to be fair, they're all just sitting in their car seats most of the time.
Maybe this was one of the times where they actually were in seatbelts too in space.
You're right.
Right.
You are 100% correct.
Like, okay, fine, we're getting rocketed through the Earth's atmosphere. We'll put on our full harness, you know.
Didn't they make an illusion in 10 that Dom finally puts on a seatbelt? I'm trying to remember.
He's got to show off, you know, the lack of sleeves and stuff like that. So I feel like having a seatbelt would just get in the way. But certainly in the first movie, I know, in the second movie, I remember like Paul Walker having like the harness seatbelt and stuff like that on. But it's very few and far between. Yeah. I feel like Ramsey, when she gets into the cars, buckles her seatbelt, and it's very obvious. It's very different, right? You can tell, like, hey, not a lot of people do that.
No, she has to show vulnerability. Dom cannot.
No, God forbid. Yeah, since we were talking about space, I was wondering if, like, I mean, maybe this is more of a question for Lisa, but like the G-forces on the human body in like car racing, is that any sort of like training or similar to like astronaut training for G-forces on the body going up into space?
I don't think they get to nearly the level that they would need to get into space, but obviously the body does have to build up some endurance when they're doing racing. So they would, I guess, be able to handle a little bit of it, but the G-forces will actually cause the blood not get to your brain as easily. And yeah, I agree. I hadn't thought about the nausea, but that is actually one of the reasons why astronauts end up doing a lot of training ahead of time. And yeah, I don't think the car racing would be enough. Okay. We'll just leave it at that.
And I think a good sensation, if you're trying to think about how it would feel like to pass out or have that sensation, like, you know, when you don't drink enough water and you get up really quickly, kind of get those like stars and whatnot. That's essentially what's going on, but like constantly, because the blood hasn't reached your brain. So then that just causes you to kind of feel lightheaded and loopy. And then the circle kind of closes in on you. Now, imagine if it closes the full way. That's basically what's going to happen to you if you're doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I went on the like ride simulator at Disney World once and almost passed out. So like, I don't think that I'm astronaut material. I
mean, it's a lot of force, so I wouldn't be down for that.
Well, since we're talking about 9 already, the strong magnets are another feature of F9 that are so fun. My favorite anecdote from Lisa is that all of the underwire bras in...
Oh, God.
All of the underwire bras in Edinburgh would be plastered against that van.
Yeah.
But more in the medical field, you know, pacemakers, like what other sorts of things might it mess with?
This would be a good callback to Dom. If the bullet was still inside Dom, it would not be inside him anymore. So that would be one of them. We know this from like MRIs, right? MRIs is probably the closest thing I can think medically to the magnet that they used. And there's like lots of pictures where things get dragged into the room if you go past a certain magnet zone. And it sounds like the magnet zone was the whole city. The other thing, there's also anecdotes where if you had a tattoo, it would warm up because your tattoo is made with iron, right?
Yeah.
So iron's magnetic. You can actually feel it warming up because it's kind of spinning a little bit. So you get actually that warm sensation as well. Obviously, if you have bad knees or bad hips that were done without titanium and you set up a metal detector, you'll probably set off with the magnet as well. So those are like the big scary things too. Most of the time, pacemakers shouldn't interfere with that stuff, but it can mess with the electronics potentially. One thing people forget is pacemakers are machines that need charging. So you go, how do you charge it? It's actually kind of like an Apple Watch or some kind of induction charger. You actually put a big magnet to their chest and then that charges it.
Wow.
So that's where induction charging is. So maybe if there's electricity attached to it, you might be charging that pacemaker too. But more likely, it's probably messing with the electronics. The other thing too is if you're thinking medical devices, there's something called a VP shunt, which helps patients with hydrocephalus, which is essentially water on the brain, helps them kind of drain fluid from their ventricles to their stomach so their heads don't swell as much. But there's a knob on there that controls how fast it drains. But if you get an MRI, it can actually mess with the knob and make it drain too little or too fast. So that's the other thing it can do too.
That's horrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the EMTs and emergency departments in Edinburgh had quite a load probably for the few days after this car chase.
Yes.
Then I was thinking of some more mundane things like the metal staples that you get post-surgery sometimes. If you're wearing glucose monitors, the things that they put in your
Dexcoms.
arm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a whole lot of not fun going on in that city while
No.
those magnets were going. They probably demagnetized every computer.
And credit card. Yeah.
That was like a Fight Club sort of reset for that city, maybe.
Yeah. If we were still watching VHS tapes, no one can watch a VHS movie ever again. But it's a bad day. Magnets are your friend, but also your foe in this situation, is what it sounds like.
And
Right.
magnets don't need to be terribly strong to jump. Like the little neodymium magnets. I actually saw one jump off a table and hit a colleague's metal watch as he was walking by once.
Jeez. Those are the ones that they tell you not to play with, right? Because even if you're just doing the like, oh, I'll try to hold them together or try to hold them apart or whatever, it can actually like injure your fingers. Or I think like in other countries, they're in kids' toys, but not in America or something like
There's
that.
the Buckyballs that were really popular for a while, and those were horrible for the emergency department because kids would come in eating Buckyballs all the time. And it's okay if you eat them all at once. It's when you eat them one at a time that's a little more dangerous
Okay.
because then they find each other in your stomach. And then,
Oh,
yeah, that's when it's dangerous because then you cause like, it's kind of like a shot, like bird shot, right? It's just scattered holes in your stomach at that point. So don't eat
Jeez.
magnets, I guess is probably my only medical advice today.
Right. I was a kid who ate everything, so I guess it's a good thing. Maybe my parents kept those out of my toy chest or something on
They were banned
purpose.
for a while and then they just came back again. I'm like, no, why? I don't need more work. I'm busy.
Yeah. So I think movie 5 is probably my favorite, but there are sometimes you really can't help but think about the collateral damage. And that movie is certainly one of them that like opens with like the prison break being like flipping the bus.
Yeah.
I don't know, dozens of times on this highway. And from what I've seen, again, only in movies, like the people are usually like chained to the floor or something like that. Like,
well,
all those people are dead, right?
Yeah. They don't have seatbelts on buses in general, right? And I learned it's because kids used to be very troublesome and beat each other up with the straps. So that's why there's no straps. But that's also why the seats are high. So if you get into an accident, you just hit the front seat. Does not count for lateral movement. So everyone's basically being rock tumbled inside of this prison bus. So yeah, no one's going to make it out alive.
Yeah. I think there's like a one-liner where it's like, thankfully everyone survived. I'm like, no, they didn't.
No one did. If they did, they're not having a good time. I think it's the best way to think of it.
And I was just thinking of that one liner because it was in the series of news reports right after, they're covering that. And they said, yeah, thankfully there were no fatalities. And I think that's the point in the saga where they start inserting those lines to make sure that we know our team didn't hurt anyone. Our team didn't kill anyone.
We're not murderers.
Right.
Yeah. But they kind of are because that wasn't, they weren't coming out of that. Okay.
Yeah. Let's say they were like kind of shackled to the floor in general. Yeah, no one died, but there were a lot of lost hands and legs for sure.
Oh, yeah, because it wouldn't really help restrain you, but it would help restrain whatever it's lashed to, I guess.
Yeah.
Dark.
Yeah. I mean, that reminded me where I had like a patient who was driving with his arm outside the window, car rolled over. He came in missing his arm. We're trying to like save him, make sure he doesn't lose a lot of blood. And then the EMT shows up going, I have some of the patient's personal belongings. I'm like, cool, put it over there. And he just slaps an arm into my chest and goes, here's his personal belonging.
What a dark sense of humor.
I just
EMTs are so grim.
I'm like, thank you. Put it in the corner, please. I will get an x-ray of it later. And you might be going, why are you getting an x-ray of a severed arm? It's actually to see if the bones are still intact to make it easy to attach or not. Let's say the arm is already broken, then we got to cast that arm or put a rod in it to straighten it out and then reattach it. So that was a weird day where I just like, I'm holding an arm, but also have a patient over there without an arm. I know these are connected, but I got to work on the patient first and then deal with the arm later.
Did it get reattached?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, time. It needed some washing for sure. It was very road rashed.
Well, so also in 5, there's the bank vault stunt, which again is probably my favorite and comes back around in terms of collateral damage in 10. But, it's swinging around wildly. And obviously some of that is a case for Lisa and the physics equations and stuff like that. I couldn't tell you whether or not what it's doing makes actual sense, but certainly what it's doing is killing lots of people.
Yeah. Wild vault. It's knocking over people. And you think like the force and the size of that vault is going to crush people or just send them flying, depending on how much it's swinging. Yeah.
And for me, I always think about how many times it crashed into a building and punched into a building and the people on the other side of that wall. That to me, is harder to reconcile with so many people getting hurt, but not even knowing what was coming for them. I think it's easier for me to visualize it coming at you and at least knowing maybe I should try to get out of the way if I can.
Yeah. I mean, just the like recovery time for all of these cities. They touch on this a little bit with like the MCU or whatever. I forget. There's that whole department, right?
Damage
Of the
control.
people, come in and clean up and smooth things over and pay off, whoever is going to sue and things like that. Something like that must exist. But you can kind of see why, maybe at some point the agency is like, maybe we don't want to work with these people anymore.
They're reckless. Who cares about collateral damage? It's just going to be a mess. It's like they're a tornado that has gone through a city and the city is left in shambles. But hey, they saved like a couple dollars. If you gross it out, they probably just saved a few bucks in there. So it's fine.
Yeah, it's funny because I love, like I said, I think 5 is my favorite. I love the bank vault. It's so much fun. I'm so glad I got to see part of it again in the 10th movie. But at the same time, I'm just like, so many people are dead. And I think Lisa's point of they don't want our heroes to like specifically kill anybody is, I'm sure, what they're doing. And those news reports, that's definitely a trope in general for telling us
it's
those
to make
things.
everyone feel better that a lot of property was destroyed, but not people. And I think that's what they're trying to emphasize on that more than anything.
Well, other thing from 5, which I don't know if this is really medical expertise, but the fingerprint on Giselle's bathing, they get Rhea's fingerprint from Giselle's bathing suit bottom.
Smudged. 100% smudged. There's no way it's going to be that legible.
I just love that she even thought of it in general. Yeah. She's like, you know what he's going to do? He's going to cut my butt.
He's going to go for it, but it's going to be a smudged fingerprint. They were very confident that one touch was enough, but like, I'm sure we've all gotten fingerprinted before. Like I had to get fingerprinted for my job. Yeah. It's straight down, roll, and then lift. And any kind of deviation from that equals smudge. It's not like your touch ID on your laptop or even that. It's like literally touch, not imprint and then lift. There's a decorum, I guess, to obtaining a fingerprint, and that is not it.
Yeah, and there's not a decorum to grabbing someone's butt.
Correct. That is a no-no in that situation. That's also why he's a bad guy. Right. That's how we established it, because he grabbed the butt.
Such a great movie. I love it.
It is fun. I just rewatched that one myself. I have enjoyed watching how they just decided to keep ramping up not just the stakes, but the chaos of the stunts. But I think the last time we actually saw anyone get first aid, there was the bullet being removed from Dom after Letty shot him. And it's a nice clean bullet, and it's a nice tiny like inch long entry wound, and he's just totally chill and fine.
It is very rare for us to remove bullets. Even by we, I mean medical professionals in general. Like surgeons don't usually remove bullets. It's kind of like a trope is if you get shot with something like an arrow or whatnot, don't pull it out, because that thing might be holding vessels from bleeding and all that stuff too. So I don't know why everyone wants to pull that stuff out. But that nice clean entrance wound, that means it stopped. Well, it's probably because Dom is so strong that it stopped in there and it didn't pierce through his muscles. But I'll see patients where they got shot and they didn't realize it because they were very fluffy and it doesn't pierce their abdomen. It just gets stuck in the fat. So doable, but they still did not remove the bullet in those patients either.
So is it that the bullet just fragments into so many pieces, or it's actually just better to leave it in?
Sometimes it's just location of the bullet. Like if it's super superficial, like if it's like right at the edge, you can take it out. But if let's say you got shot in the abdomen and you stop the bleeding and whatnot, and you're not bleeding out, they just leave it, because it actually will cause more damage to go in and get it out than just leaving it there. Because you got to make a bigger hole to get the bullet out than it came in, right?
That makes sense.
So that's a big reason why a lot of times bullets are left behind.
So now I'm thinking of all the people that big magnet was taking left behind bullets out of their bodies. Okay, that got even more grim.
Yeah, and in the most efficient path, right? Not like nice and cleanly, direct to the surface or anything like that.
There's no least resistance when it's in your body and a magnet's nearby. It's basically straight through.
I'll have to watch that scene again with them pulling the bullet out, because I couldn't remember. I'm like, do they leave it in? I felt like he just sort of like shrugs and is like, and then moves on with his,
He shrugs and the bullet falls out of his body. That probably would be it too. I would not be surprised if that's what happened as well.
But then you wouldn't have the scene, because they always have to drop the bullet into some little like metal kidney shaped pan or something like that, so you can hear the clatter of it. I feel like that's such a thing. I'm like, where do people get these instruments, and where do they get these little bowls?
From the 80s. We still use them. Like I have the kidney basin that I still use on patients. Like if I'm cleaning their ear, it's nice because it kind of holds right next to their face, on the side of the face, and you can help irrigate.
Okay.
It's good if you have to hold it next to any kind of round body part that you're trying to clean or take care of. So it's nice on that part. But other than that, it really is a weird shaped basin.
All right. Well, since we mentioned Letty, we can talk a little bit about, I don't know how much you know about amnesia and how it really works. Everything I know about amnesia, I learned from like soap operas and telenovelas. So I'm going to assume it's not right.
Yeah, like Letty she was dead.
Right.
And then she came back to life, but she had no memory of Dom, I think was the gist of it. There are such things as traumatic brain amnesias that are related to that. It's not uncommon to happen, but usually not to the extent that you see in movies where they forget everybody and who they were and whatnot. Sometimes it's just events that lead up to or right after. So there's retrograde amnesia and anterograde amnesia. So sometimes you can actually forget things that happened before the incident, minutes to hours. And then sometimes you just don't form new memories for a little bit. And that's called anterograde amnesia. So that's after. So we'll see that sometimes. It's really common in like your football players who get really hit hard and then they lose a little bit. The rare cases, the ones that you always see on TV and movies, are the ones that last a little longer, but most cases last only like weeks to months. It's really rare for it to last years and forever, but it just depends on the person and the incident that happened. And then there's also like the psychosomatic version of it too, which is like functional amnesia, where it's just one particular thing that's gone, and that could be like a mental health thing as well.
Okay, so it sounds like actually what they portray or whatever could technically be true, right? She went through this traumatic experience physically and, emotionally. The way they used it to like, because I just assumed Michelle Rodriguez didn't sign on for movie 5.
No, she didn't.
And then came back, was like, wait, 5 was awesome. I'll be in 6.
That's why Elena came in.
Right, that's right, exactly. So, yes, and has apparently stayed dead so far at least. But
just wait till Fast 10 2.
Fast 10 2.
Yes, that's what it's going to be. Fast 10 2. Everyone's back.
There's not going to be room on the movie poster.
Or their budget, because I think a quarter of their budget went to actor salaries.
So going back to the memory loss and the amnesia, I have a friend who had a concussion like 5 months ago and is still recovering. Yeah. And I'm thinking of the way everybody in these movies is getting jolted around. The level of traumatic brain injuries they should be incurring. Should we see some functional difficulties that they should be having by the time they're in Fast 10?
Yeah, it's almost like that trope where you can always take the one punch knockout, I guess, is always the thing you see, right? But the hero never has the one punch knockout. But no one recovers and has a good day after getting knocked out or getting that jostled. And essentially, a concussion, for people who don't know, is just, it's a nice way of saying brain bruise. So your head is surrounded by water, and when it gets jostled around, basically it takes some bruising to your brain, and that's what causes those symptoms. And sometimes it's hard to create new memories. Sometimes you have a lot of brain fog. Even simple things like watching TV can cause really bad headaches too. So you're thinking about all these people who are going about planning massive heists. They must have the worst headaches in the world and probably super nauseous at the same time. So there's no way you can go about your day after taking such a big hit to your head.
Yeah, now I'm just picturing, the actual final scene of 10, 12 or, whatever movie that's going to quote unquote end the franchise, being them all in like some sort of, brain trauma healing ward, having a joint, delusion about the last 5 movies or something like that.
Like they're all just sitting in like the CTE ward and just dreaming or reminiscing or having a dream about what just happened.
Right.
Just all one fuzzy flashback, all in Dom's head.
So
oh my God, if they end it that way, there's going to be riots.
So bleak.
Gonna be massive riots if that does happen.
Yeah, I assume they're actually gonna end it with like the next generation, right? So like little Brian and whoever else, maybe actual character Brian and Mia's kids and stuff like that, street racing or something.
That franchise will never die.
No, and I hope it doesn't, honestly. Like when they said these are the last movies, I'm like, but why?
Last movies for them until the next generation.
I mean, it worked for Star Trek, so.
Yep, it definitely did.
Another fun thing in 6, even while Letty has amnesia, right? Dom is trying to save her and turn her back to the good side or whatever. And maybe the most ridiculous physics stunt, I would say, is him like steering a car. They're on a bridge. I feel like there's a tank behind them.
Yep.
So yeah, on a bridge, steers the car so that it crashes and throws. I mean, this man must be a mathematical genius, right? Steers the car in exact direction to throw him in the exact direction to grab her in midair and then land on the windshield of a car as a quote unquote cushion.
Yes.
Just no, but it looks real cool.
Also, that windshield's super strong.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
All the way through.
Oh, yeah. It just sort of cracks, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, maybe he had also taken into account the air drag efficiently enough so that they were at a slower speed when they hit. But yeah, that of almost everything that they do, that leap into the air where he captures her, there's no way they could do that. So yeah, I'm happier with that car going into space than I am with that stunt.
All I was thinking was like, how come he no bloody? I was
Right.
expecting like cheese grater levels of that too. There's no way he's not enough of a cushion to block her from getting hurt seriously. But see, now you go into the Dom paradox. Is he too tough and hard to get penetrated by a bullet, or is he too squishy that he could cushion someone's fall? So is he
Right.
squishy or hard?
Whatever he needs to be for family.
I just love that you called that the Dom paradox.
It is the Dom paradox.
That's great. And you're absolutely correct. Yeah, he is whatever he needs to be to anyone at any time.
Right, exactly. So whether or not they're in the family, whether or not they're about to be converted into family, he's there. Yeah, I'm gonna have to really watch with a close eye. Like, does he literally ever bleed? Even in like the first movie, I honestly can't remember.
It's never more than a trickle. And
Right.
it's just like a couple streaks of blood here and there. Always a trope, blood on the side of the mouth, because that tells you have internal injury.
That's why going back and watching Too Fast, Too Furious, I rewatched it for the first time in a while and seeing Roman and Brian actually injured after that. Carl jump into the boat and Roman saying, I think I broke my arm. And Brian actually just like, he was in pain. And
I think he says, ow, probably the only
feel
time.
things. They used to feel things.
They are people.
At least in 2.
Correct. After that, forget it. No one's people again.
Yeah, I do feel like that's maybe the first and last time we ever see like EMTs, treating our heroes after some sort of stunt. So, when I was thinking about when we were talking about Dom as a cushion, because it happens a couple other times. I feel like Hobbs cushions Elena when they fall out of a window. Like he falls on the car, and so she's like he groans, but she's like totally fine. And then it happens in 10 also. It happens in like an elevator. That'll be a whole physics question of like, can you actually land on a person in a falling elevator and be just fine? Most of them are shaking their heads.
No.
Biophysical and physical, no. None of it.
Good stuff though, man. So fun. Well, we're definitely counting Hobbs and Shaw as part of this, even though they go full superhero really in that one with Idris Elba's character. Spine implant that gives him super strength, I feel like is about the extent of the like explanation we get, which sure, I buy it. That's fine.
Sure, I'll take it. Was this the one with nanomachines? No.
There's like the super virus thing.
That's the
that
one.
Like, yeah.
It wasn't his sister, right?
Right, exactly. The sister's got to like get like dialysis to get it out of her kind of thing.
Yeah, a backpack dialysis, basically. That one made no sense. I think we talked about that in our episode about Hobbs and Shaw. Was like, that would be a super fragile thing to kind of go through, because if any kind of nick in the machinery happens or in the tubing, then basically you can't filter out the blood anymore. So that's like a problem there. And then I don't think it has that kind of durability. It also kind of acts like an external heart for her. Yeah, kind of like an external heart. Everything's pumping through and trying to make sure that she stays alive, but none of that made sense at all.
Well, I was just thinking that just brought up a question about, because I know how I feel when watching space stuff. Like if they push a button and say they went into hyperspace, I'm good because they didn't try to explain it to me and get it wrong, like, as magic. So that spinal implant that they said could give super strength, if they don't try to explain it too much, are you happier with that?
Kind of, because then I don't have to wrap my brain around the mechanics and science of it. But then when I hear spinal implant, I go, but how does that make the muscles stronger? It doesn't, because your muscles are your end organ that gets innervated by those nerves. And the nerves firing harder doesn't make your muscles go harder, in theory. It can just make it stimulate over and over again, but it shouldn't give you super strength on that part. The inverse happens, where if there's no nerve innervation to certain muscles, then it atrophies and it withers away and dies. But I'm trying to think in the context of, if you have more power in your spine, will that change anything? And I can't think of anything like that unless you were already paralyzed.
Right. No, and that makes sense, Lisa, what you say. It's like, just, if this is a technology that exists in your universe, I accept it. If you try to start with the technobabble and you get it wrong, I'm gonna notice.
Yeah, it completely takes you out of the moment. You're just like, no, that's not how that works. And I have a whole list of things that irritates me about that. So I can only imagine for a medical doctor watching TV and movies, it just must be so hard to stay in the moment during these incidents.
If you make me watch The Resident or The Good Doctor, I will lose it. My co-host will make me watch it just to see the rage on my face when we talk about it during episodes. Like, I can't do this, you guys. This is too much. And like my residents will ask me about it too. Like, hey, did you see this episode of what? And I'm like, yes, please God, no. Please don't make me watch it. It's so painful. If you have suggestions, you can always tweet them at us and we'll do it.
Yes, definitely. If there's anything else that we didn't cover, Jackson, that you want to cover, or now's a good time to bring them up.
Han won't come back from that car accident.
So yeah, that's the one I wanted to get back to as well, is Han, who I wanted to come back because I love Han. So I will take him and I will try to turn off the brain. But does he come back from that accident?
Absolutely not, especially because he wasn't even restrained. So like, I can get why he can't escape out of the car because he probably has just been turned into a bloody pulp. But also, those are the car accidents that I'll see where people get ejected, especially because it rolled. I'm trying to remember if it rolled or not. I think it did when it got T-boned. So that kind of force, especially where he got hit, he would either be rolling out of the car and getting scraped under the weight of the car or on top and getting flung out of the car top-wise, because he was not wearing a seatbelt. I double-checked that. But the way that they got Mr. Nobody to fake his death, I don't understand how that happened.
No,
also,
we were all blinded by the fact that he was back, so no one was listening to that explanation, I think.
I still don't understand it. And I'm guessing the car exploded because NOS, maybe? Because cars usually don't explode that quickly unless there was something else in there. So that's the only other thing I can think of is that why the car exploded. Let's say they pulled him out of the car. There's still collateral damage from the explosion itself. So he probably would have been like horribly burned.
Of all the accidents, that's the one that is shot as to say, like, look, this character is not coming back. We killed him dead. But no, it didn't happen.
He didn't die off screen either. Like, you saw his face when the car was on fire and then they tried to go in and save him and he blew up.
I'm glad they brought him back, though. Yeah. Honestly, all of these things, I'm like, I don't care. I love Han. And I love that they teased us for a little while, too. They were like, should we go to Tokyo? It's like, nah, let's do that later. So it's like, oh, good. He'll be back for at least one more. And then when he came back for real in 9, I was thrilled.
He just walked in so nonchalantly, too. Like, yeah, I'm alive.
He's the coolest.
Yeah. That's why everyone likes him. That's why he's Han Solo, basically. I think most people's favorite character. And you would think people would go like, oh, Dom and whatnot. I'm like, no, it's definitely Han because he's so laissez-faire about everything.
Well, and that's true to his name then, because really on Star Warsologies, we always get people's first favorite character isn't always Han Solo, but they're always like, oh, and Han Solo.
Yeah.
You know, because he's just cool and appeals to pretty much everybody. So, well, where can we find you? You want to tell us or how to listen to the podcast and where to find you?
So you can find our podcast on basically anywhere where you listen to it. It's Hi Everybody, a Bad Medicine podcast. You can tweet us. You can find us on Instagram or on Twitter at Hi Everybody MD. Our website's hieverybodymd.com. And then you can also call us and leave us a message at 530-DOCTORB. That's 530-DOCTORB. If you're a Simpsons fan, you will understand that reference from Dr. Nick.
Is that his phone number in The Simpsons?
I think it's like 1-900 or 1-600 Doctorb, and the B stands for bargain. So that's the thing that we always try to come up with every episode. So whatever the B is for.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your Fast and Furious enthusiasm and also the things you know too much about with us.
I appreciate you guys having us. It was really fun. Thank you so much.
You asked me why I let Dom go. I think it's because at that moment, I respected him more than I did myself. One thing I learned from Dom is that nothing really matters unless you have a code.
What's your code, Brian?
I'm working on it.
That wraps up this episode of The Facts and the Furious. We want to thank our guest, Jackson Vane, and we want to thank all of you for listening. Check out the show notes for links to our guest and more info. Remember, reality-based physics comes and goes, but family is forever.
And we'll see you next time on The Facts and the Furious when we discuss the 5th movie, Fast 5, and welcome an effects artist to the family.